The lost city of El Dorado, also known simply as Z, has captivated the imaginations of explorers, historians, and adventurers for centuries. This elusive city, shrouded in mystery, lies somewhere, still asleep, within the heart of the Amazon rainforest. And its existence is still debated among scholars and explorers. The quest to find this mythical city has been marked by tragedy, discovery, and continuous speculation. This podcast dives into the history, exploration, twists and turns, and new light shining on the lost city of Z, El Dorado. Friends, welcome to the Mysteries of Latin America podcast. My name is Andrew Colón, and together we're going to explore the myths, legends, and surreal stories that have happened and are still happening in North, Central, South America, and the Caribbean. This week, we're going to take a trip in time from the 16th century up to today as we tell you about the search for the lost city of El Dorado. As we get into the story, please remember to subscribe to the podcast wherever you're watching or listening to us. If you're catching this on YouTube, look for the little purple subscribe button on the bottom right, and you'll never miss an episode. Now, let's go find the lost city of Z, El Dorado. The legend of El Dorado, or the lost city of Z, has its origins in the early 16th century, when Spanish explorers set their sights on exploring the New World after the advent of Columbus. As far as we know, the story of El Dorado started in the Muisca territory of present-day Colombia, where it was believed that a tribal leader called the Zipa would be covered in gold dust and offerings before embarking on a sacred lake ceremony. This legend of a golden king gave rise to the Spanish myth of El Dorado, which in Spanish literally means the golden one, and the Spanish took it to mean that there was an entire city made of gold. In the 16th century, Spanish conquistadors embarked on various expeditions to locate this city, but the search was futile, and the myth of El Dorado even moved around to different locations over time. This myth of a lost city took a new turn in the early 20th century. In 1906, the Royal Geographical Society, a British organization that sponsors scientific expeditions, invited British explorer Colonel Percy Harrison Fawcett to survey part of the borderlands between Brazil and Bolivia in South America. But Fawcett was no ordinary city slicker or amateur explorer. From all accounts, he was practically immune to yellow fever, a serious disease at the time. He could hike through dense jungles for up to 12 hours at a clip, and he finished one expedition almost a year ahead of time. Unheard of back then. If you're looking for a real-life Indiana Jones, friends, I think we found him. Despite the hardships of the journey, this man was in love with the Amazon. In 1911, a 44-year-old Fawcett left his home and family to go to the Amazon and chart hundreds of miles of unexplored jungle. It was on this trip that he developed a theory that the ruins of an ancient city, which he named Z, lay hidden in the jungle. News of Fawcett's exploits in the Amazon became big news back in the UK, so much so that in 1912, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle of Sherlock Holmes fame drew on Fawcett's expeditions in the Amazon for his novel The Lost World and fueled the explorer's fame around the world. He had to find this El Dorado, his lost city of Z, where all evidence showed it was in Brazil. Fawcett was putting together an expedition to find this lost civilization when World War I broke out and the British government suspended its support. Fawcett went back to Britain and served in the war. His exploration would have to wait. After the war in 1920, Fawcett made a discovery that would change everything. He found a document in the Brazilian National Library in Rio de Janeiro, mysteriously called Manuscript 512. It was written by a Portuguese bandeirante, or explorer, named João da Silva Guimarães in 1753, who claimed to have found a walled city deep in the Amazon rainforest that reminded him of ancient Greece, but didn't give its exact location. The manuscript described a city filled with silver and gold, multi-storied buildings, soaring stone arches, wide streets leading down toward a lake on which the explorer had seen two white Indians, in his words, in a canoe. Fawcett's passion was fueled by a combination of archaeological curiosity and a desire to prove the existence of a civilization superior to those in Europe. You see, unlike many explorers who saw themselves as the Great White Hope liberating the savages from ignorance, Fawcett was an outspoken opponent of the destruction of indigenous cultures and colonization. He was fascinated by the rich culture, legends, and traditions of local tribes, along with ancient pottery he'd seen near the Amazon River, and by the mysterious raised mounds of earth scattered through the rainforest. In 1920, he resumed his search for this lost city of Z, embarking on an expedition that ended in 1921 at what he called Dead Horse Camp, where, delirious with fever, he had to resort to shooting his ailing horse, and he went back to Britain in defeat. The following year, in 1921, Fawcett set out on the first of many expeditions, specifically designed to find the lost city. But he and his team were frequently hindered by the hardships of the jungle, dangerous animals, and rampant diseases. Over the course of several expeditions, Fawcett mapped out vast swaths of the Amazon, collecting artifacts and accounts from indigenous tribes that hinted at the presence of an advanced city deep within the rainforest. In April 1925, at the age of 57, he attempted one last time to find Z, this time better equipped and better financed by newspapers and societies including the Royal Geographic Society and the Rockefellers. His son Jack also joined him on the expedition with Jack's friend Raleigh Rimmel. In a letter home sent back via a team member, Fawcett sent a message to his wife Nina and proclaimed, "We hope to get through this region in a few days. You need have no fear of any failure." And if you've heard this podcast before, you know that with those words, neither he, his son Jack, or Raleigh were ever seen or heard from again. And what happened after the loss of the Fawcett expedition? The disappearances of the Fawcetts and their party only added to the legend of the lost city, as numerous subsequent expeditions set out to find out what happened to the Fawcetts. In the decades after, hundreds of would-be rescuers, Fawcett-obsessed fans, and glory seekers set out to track him, many meeting a similar fate. To this day, at least 100 people have disappeared following Fawcett's trail. Starting in 1928, the first major search for Fawcett's expedition was led by a fellow member of the Royal Geographical Society by the name of George Daya. The expedition didn't find Fawcett or any real evidence of his death, but for several decades following, dozens of search parties would follow. Many searchers were killed or disappeared. In 1930, though, there was a breakthrough of sorts. Percy Fawcett's compass was found at the camp of the indigenous Bacairi people of Mato Grosso, Brazil, and made its way to the Royal Geographical Society, who delivered it to his wife Nina. In 1955, Brian Fawcett, Percy's other son, conducted his own search for his father and brother, but the search came up empty. In February of that year, the New York Times made the claim that Fawcett's disappearance has set off more searches to find him than those launched through the centuries to find El Dorado itself. They're not wrong. And then in 1996, Hermes Leal wrote the biography Colonel Fawcett, The Real-Life Indiana Jones in Portuguese. James Lynch, a prominent Brazilian financier, led a search party into the Amazon, tracking down any evidence of Fawcett or his doomed expedition. What he got himself was kidnapped. Fortunately, he escaped, but the Amazon is not something to be trifled with. Not with nature and not with people. One person who did dive headfirst into the story and the Amazon was American author David Grann. In 2005, he did a deep dive into all of the evidence, archives, and information he could find on the ill-fated explorer. He then retraced Fawcett's steps and made what he thought was a startling discovery. His findings, however, remain a subject of debate, with critics questioning his evidence and his conclusions. Some of the more unusual theories that Grann uncovered were that Fawcett established a sort of jungle commune or cult out in the rainforest, or that he had an accident or illness that gave him amnesia, where he forgot his old life and spent the rest of his life as the chief of a cannibal tribe. While stranger things certainly have happened, David Gran thinks that Fawcett and his group were probably killed by an indigenous tribe defending their lands. In 2009, Gran published a book he titled The Lost City of Z, where he said that there's an oral history that's part of the mythology of the indigenous Amazonian Kalapalo group that mentions Fawcett or a Fawcett-like character. He thinks it's Fawcett because of a peculiar detail of one of the characters in one of their stories. The character, an intrepid explorer, played a recorder-like flute to entertain himself and his men, something that the real Fawcett did as well. The story also said that the Fawcett-like character wanted to head east toward fierce enemies of the Kalapalo. The Kalapalo tried to discourage Fawcett from going in that direction, but Fawcett insisted. The story says this: they could see the fire rise above the trees, and when the fire went out, they couldn't find any remains. The implication was that Fawcett and his party were killed, but we'll never be sure. Since then, the myth of the lost city of Z, or El Dorado, has grown exponentially. Z and El Dorado have now taken on the status of being the lost pinnacle of humanity, with wonders unequaled by modern technology and science. Like Atlantis, the lost city has grown in our collective imaginations. It's no longer just the city of a golden leader in the middle of the rainforest. Now, El Dorado has become something almost out of science fiction. Pharmaceutical, technological, and social marvels have been credited to the place, from the invention of cars to planes to geothermal energy. Others have gone further and described it as a portal to another dimension, or the stars. Religions have actually been founded with the lost city at its center, some even holding up Percy Fawcett as some sort of messiah or prophet figure. If this sounds like an Amazonian version of Wakanda, I think we're on the same wavelength. Another controversial theory is that Z, or El Dorado, could be a reference to multiple sites rather than just a single city. Some researchers argue that Z might be a complex of cities or ceremonial centers built by different Amazonian cultures. This multiplicity of interpretations adds another layer of complexity to the quest for the lost city of Z, and we'll tell you about an important discovery shortly. But there's a twist to all this story, and it couldn't have been better if it came right out of Indiana Jones. According to David Gran, who quite literally wrote the book on the Fawcett adventures and the lost city, he says that Percy Fawcett deliberately left a fake trail to throw his rivals off his course. He said that Fawcett wrote that his expedition began at a place called Dead Horse Camp, where he had to shoot his horse, and he gave its coordinates. Dozens of search parties who went out looking for him and the lost city after its disappearance used these coordinates in vain. The real coordinates, it seems, were hidden in one of Fawcett's diaries, and that location was more than 100 miles or 160 kilometers to the south, way off when you're talking about the Amazon rainforest. Gran's interest in the story of Percy Fawcett wasn't just an interest anymore. It became a full-blown obsession, and he had to ride this train to wherever it went. Using clues he found in letters, diaries, and a book published by Percy's son Brian in 1953, he found certain coordinates for the place where the expeditions supposedly began, Dead Horse Camp. And then he met Fawcett's granddaughter and convinced her to turn over some of her grandfather's documents. In those documents, he found a log entry from 1921 giving the real coordinates to Dead Horse Camp, and he used this information and directions no one else had seen. In 2005, at the end of Gran's journey, he met an archaeologist, Michael Heckenberger, who showed him concrete evidence of a sophisticated ancient civilization lying right at a site under their feet. Heckenberger had found and was unearthing a site in the region of the Amazon near the Singu River, one of the mighty Amazon's tributaries. They discovered large geometrical earth formations using LiDAR, a remote sensing method similar to radar that uses a pulsed laser to measure the surface of the earth, and it can penetrate deep jungles, and it revealed hidden archaeological features that seemed to support the theory of a massive city like the one out of the El Dorado story. The evidence points to a city surrounded by moats and circles, with wooden buildings and roads that cut right across the rainforest. It also showed that the people who lived in the city were able to make the infertile soil rich for planting, using their ancient techniques to create what we now know as Black Earth. Today, this site is called Kuhikugu, and the tribes of the area had pottery methods, dietary traditions, and even laid out their villages all in the same way. This area is now thought to have been home to over 20 different but related settlements with over 5,000 inhabitants. Some think that might have been as high as 50,000 people, and the evidence said they had an incredible sense of engineering. Their culture lasted from about 200 AD to about the year 1600, when diseases brought by European conquerors seemed to wipe them out in only a few generations. Those early conquerors were able to get a glimpse of some of their civilization, hence the legends that made it back to Europe. But by the time they came back, the people had died off or relocated, and the rainforest took its land back, covering it all in a thick jungle canopy. Researchers have even found pottery in the area that looks to predate even the early Clovis culture, suggesting that people made it down to South America a lot earlier than 13,000 years ago. Maybe this was their El Dorado, Percy Fawcett's lost city of Z. This new information notwithstanding, El Dorado, or the lost city of Z, is still largely an enigma. The quest to find this mythical city has been marked by controversy and tragedy, and yet it still captivates the imagination of adventurers and internet sleuths like me. As technology advances and new discoveries are made, the mystery of El Dorado might one day be solved, I hope in my lifetime, hopefully shedding the right light on ancient civilizations that once thrived in the heart of the Amazon. Friends, thanks so much for joining us once again to listen to the stories of the myths, legends, and surreal things that happen in North, Central, South America, and the Caribbean. Oh, and there's so much more to tell. And I hope you join me with the next episode. Make sure to subscribe wherever you're listening so we can get together again and tell you a story on the mysteries of Latin America. I'm Andrew Colón. Adios.